R. Zamora Linmark is the author of The Importance of Being Wild at Heart, his first novel for young adults from Delacorte Random House. He has also published 2 novels, Rolling the R's with Kaya Press, which he adapted for stage, and Leche from Coffee House Press, as well as 4 poetry collections, most recently Pop Verite from Hanging Loose Press. He divides his time between Honolulu, Hawaii, and Baguio, Philippines. After Zach reads from their book, Gina will come up and they will be in moderated conversation. Publishers Weekly named Gina Apostol's Insurrecto one of the 10 best books of 2018. The New York Times calls Insurrecto a bravura performance. Apostol is a magician with language. Think Borges, think Nabokov. Her third book, Gun Dealer's Daughter, won the 2013 PEN Open Book Award and was shortlisted for the William Saroyan International Prize. Her first 2 novels, Bibliolepsy and The Revolution According to Raimundo Mata, both won the Juan Laya Prize for the novel. Her most recent work uses her research on the Philippine-American War to cast a lens on our contemporary times. Her essays and stories have appeared in the New York Times, Los Angeles Review of Books, Foreign Policy, Gettysburg Review, Massachusetts Review, and others. She lives in New York City and Western Massachusetts and grew up in Tacloban, Philippines. She teaches at the Fieldston School in New York City. Please give a round of applause for R. Zamora Linmark.
I did that on purpose. Okay, here we go. I'm going to warm up with a vignette from Rolling the R's. But before I begin, I want to thank 4 founders of Asian American Writers Workshop, Marie Lee, Curtis Chin, Christina Chu, and Binoria Luyo. Because without them, I don't think this workshop would be here right now. So the first reading that I did with Asian American Writers Workshop was in 1996, when the paperback edition of this novel came out. And it was like at a basement somewhere, like St. Mark's. Okay. And I read from this novel. The Sentencing of Lives, or Why Edgar Almost Failed Mrs. Takimoto's Class. Please form a sentence with the following words. Watch your punctuation. No Hawaiian Pidgin English allowed. You have 45 minutes. Nostalgia, noun. I get all nostalgia when I listen to Yvonne Elements, If I Can't Have You, Andy Gibbs, Our Love, Don't Throw It All Away, and Auntie Dion's I'll Never Love This Way Again. Elegy, noun, tragedy. An elegy included in the Bee Gees album Spirits Having Flown hit the #1 spot in both Billboard's pop singles and adult contemporary charts. Misinterpret, verb. Katrina and I started buying Song Hits magazine because we misinterpret a lot of Bee Gees songs. Sobriety, noun. When my father drinks and beats the shit out of me, I wish he would be sobriety. Vituperative, adjective. Our teacher will never be nice because she has a lot of vituperative living in her stomach. Sanity, noun. I vote my mother as Miss Hygienic because she always uses her sanity pads when she gets her rags. Alienation, noun. After defecting the Philippines of Mr. Marcos, Florante's family continues to write in this alienation. Clandestine, adjective. In this class is a clandestine boy who freaked out after I gave him a torrid kiss. Maudlin, adjective. My maudlin career is taking off so fast that if I don't try and control it, I'm going to have a nervous breakdown. Eliminate, verb. After the interview portion, Miss India had all chances eliminate to become Miss Universe because she said that if there's one thing she can do to help her country, it is to build a stadium. Heatwave, noun. Exotica's and Daniel's love theme songs are Dim All the Lights by Donna Summer and Always and Forever by Heatwave. Calamity, noun. When I think of the Hapa Howley Fox I make Trina and Loata spy on in the arcade in Mitsukoshi building, my hands get all calamity inside. Testimony, noun. My testimony is to someday window shop at Ala Moana Center with his hand in mine. Destiny, noun. I know this word so close to my heart that it hurts. Okay, I'm ready. So I'm reading from this my first YA novel, The Importance of Being Wild at Heart. The idea came to me, actually it attacked me, in 2010. I remember this. I was in Manila, in my studio apartment, and I was reading the biography of Oscar Wilde, Richard Ellman's Doorstopper, and I said I'm gonna read this cover to cover, and I'm not gonna leave the house. At around the same time, while I was reading the tragic life of this Irish playwright back in Victorian age 1890s, there were like 4 teenagers that had committed suicide, and all 4 were from different ethnicities and race, and but they all had one thing in common, or 2 things: they were all gay, and they were all bullied, and I felt that it was the first time that I felt I had to do something as a writer. It was my responsibility as a writer to address these issues. I know I've addressed them before, but this time it was going to be for a specific audience. I don't write with an audience in mind, and but this time I wanted young adult readers for this book to be available to them should they be in the same situation, getting their hearts broken included, and with the hope that it would lessen the pain, if not derail the tragedy. So once I got my character Kenzie, who's a listomaniac and who writes haikus and lives in the ghetto of this place called South Crystal, as opposed to the Ritchie and military-ruled North Crystal with his mother. Once I got that down, I began writing it like 2 years later, and it's been an obsession since for 4 years. And I finished it, I think, at the University of Miami, where I was a visiting writer and teacher. So the book, like if you're familiar with Rolling the R's, it has that hybrid form of haikus and lists and what else? Essays, school essays, and emails and letters, and with cameo appearances by Oscar Wilde to guide this character, the 17-year-old character who's experiencing love and heartbreak for the very first time. And so here's the beginning. I'll just read the first 6 pages just to give you a feel of the texture of the novel. There are 2 ways to begin this story. A haiku. Little miracles. Inside a minute, a blue-throated hummingbird's 1,000 heartbeats. Or a prayer. Dear Oscar Wilde, patron saint of rebels and bookworms, this is Kenzie. I'm 17 years old, a senior at South Crystal High. I live on an island in the middle of nowhere Pacific Ocean. So tiny, you need a magnifying glass to spot us on the map. Oscar, I met someone. There. It's out. Woo. Yes, Oscar. I met someone earlier this week, and this morning I woke up to my heartbeat beating 1,000 hummingbird heartbeats. It felt new and strange, and anything new and strange to me is worth exploring, like Antarctica. I don't know where my heart is zooming to, so if you could please guide me through this unfamiliar map. Your forever devotee, Kenzie. P.S. His name is Ran. So Ran is from the north, and it's one of those border stories where the north can go to south, but the people from the south need a visa to go to the north. And one of the challenges aside from writing for a targeted audience, was writing about romance, and I'm not a pro at that. And so it took me like I don't know how long, how many months to write this, but this is their anyway. You'll know. This one is called Seven Steps to Eternity. Friday, 8 March. Tonight is the night of first. It's the first time I slick back my hair and put on my brand new pair of ankle-length pants to go with my checkered polo shirt. It's the first time I wear my shirt with the top button undone. It's the first time I smile in front of the mirror and a stranger who looks like the spitting image of me smiles back. And if I want to, I can go back to Mirage and Bunbury again, this time pretend with the confidence of a high-powered advertising executive. It's the first time another guy stands beside me in front of the mirror and looks straight at my reflection. It's the first time I feel the lightness of meaning. It's the first time anyone has taken this much in me, not counting my best friends Kaz and Estelle. It's the first time a guy asks me if I ever kiss someone. I want to run out of my room, out of this world. I don't. It's the first time fear has worked in my favor. How can I possibly answer Rand's question? What do I know about kissing? The answer's easy. Two-letter word, yet the most difficult one to say and hear. Steering my eyes away from his gaze, my voice finally cracks on no. After that, all I want to do is dive deep into one of the underwater volcanoes that surround our island. And it's right then that I finally realize his hand is folded over mine. He's done it again. He's taken my hand while my mind went wandering off, tightening his grasp as I'm about to pull away. Just a little longer, Kenzie, Rand says. Please. Then he gives me one of those nervous smiles you give to the person you like and you hope will like you back. I only wish that it had been, you know, he pauses as his voice starts to break, that it mattered, that it began like this. Rand continues. What mattered? What happened? I want him to tell me so I can understand the sadness in his eyes and why suddenly he became very quiet, his grasp loosening as if he's retreating into his own world. For a moment, I think he's going to let go. He doesn't. Instead, he unfolds my right hand and, like a web, spreads it over his face until all I feel are his lips like gills pulsing against the cup of my palm. With his hand over mine, he guides them over his brows, his closed eyelids, his cheeks, his mouth breathing into my palm, his warm breath moistening my lifelines. Kenzie? Rand says, taking my hand from his face and holding it between his hands. Be random with me. Be random? What does that mean? Be with him? Be spontaneous? Like a Kenzie list unraveling? Like being assaulted by 10,000 thought bubbles at once? My heart begins beating rapidly like a panther that upon waking from a deep sleep finds itself trapped inside a cage and starts to grow wild with fury. Be random for me, Kenzie, Rand says. For you? For us, he says. Us? Yes, us. My world is suddenly reduced to a fantastic blur. Like a cat, he nuzzles my cheek, my neck. He laughs, I laugh. The end. Wrong, because without a warning, he plants a wet smack on my lips and then another. I want to pull away, but I'm in too much shock. Totally unprepared and embarrassed. My lips are chapped. I want the night to run away, for us to start all over. I can feel my insides turning, my legs weak and rubbery, my hands trembling, my face flushed from embarrassment. Kenzie, it's okay, Rand says and holds my face. He looks into my eyes and smiles the kind of smile that comforts you before you're about to cry. Hey, Kenzie. He wraps his arms around me. I don't know what to do with my hands, where they're supposed to go. We stay there in a one-sided embrace for I don't know how long until I realize we're swaying with my hands resting lightly on his back. Then, releasing me from his arms, he tells me to close my eyes. I shut them tight, lost as ever, this time a little less terrified. With spotted kisses, he anoints my forehead, my closed lids, my cheeks, and finally my mouth. His rapid breathing, letting me know that the fear and thrill are mutual. A kiss is a magical thing. This is the first lesson I learned about kissing. It turns fear into fantastic, danger into beauty, uncertainty into comfort. With his tongue, he tempts my mouth to open a little and play. Suddenly, our tongues collide, or rather, his tongue sweeps over mine. I freeze. It feels weird. He does it again and again, like he's telling me something urgent, a secret code he wants me to learn fast. I don't know what he wants. I try to pull away, but he tightens his hold around me, his face pressed against mine. As I slide my tongue out of his mouth, he scoops it back with his mouth as if he's going to swallow it. The second lesson in French, langue means tongue, language. Tonight, language is a hunger playing with fire. A strange feeling kissing is, but I'm glad for the blur, glad that it's happening with Ran, who steadies me firmly with his embrace until he feels my arms wrapped tight around him. Like a student eager to learn more, I replay the night's first lesson for him. Back and forth, our tongues send each other's messages, speaking to each other in our own codes, forgive and need, hunger and fire. The third lesson, kiss like you're telling a story with another person in a language that's completely yours, with the two of you making it up as you go along. Ran changes the tempo. I quickly follow. Seconds later, it's his turn to surrender to my lead. Time ticks to our tongues taking turns, flicking, rushing, exploring to feed the craving. Round and round our tongues go, coaxing and chasing each other. His hands cradling my face, my fingers caressing his back. The fourth lesson, kissing is like jazz. It too has its glorious rough spots. Curious to see what he looks like kissing me, I open my eyes and I'm surprised to see a pained expression on his face. He looks like a lost child. He stops because I must have stopped too. Too puzzled and sad to continue. He smiles to ask me, "What's wrong?" I smile back to say, "I'm not sure." Then he really releases me from his grasp. I thought the lesson for the night have come to an end when suddenly he takes my face in his hands and blows a blast of air into my mouth. I taste it, warm, sweet, craveable. The fifth lesson, kissing is a mirror, watching and being watched. Before I know it, we're tasting each other's lips again, swallowing each other's breaths again, getting lost, then found, then lost in each other's sigh again. Our tongues going in circles, chasing and teasing and changing the speed of our want again, all for a beauty that once caused so much fear and unease and nervousness. And in the end, it turns out to be a magnificent blossoming, this dangerously delicious jazz called kissing. The sixth lesson, kissing is like playing a crazy game of conquest and surrender. Tonight, we kiss for what seems like forever until the heart, like the panther it is, returns to its cage. The seventh and final lesson, kiss as if it's the end of eternity. All right. So I'm going to read two more poems, two more lists. This one, Kaz, is from an indigenous tribe called the Pula in this fictitious island that I imagined, called Crystal. And Kaz was beaten like a year or two before the start of the novel. And Kenzie also has another friend named Estelle, who's an androgynous wordsmith. Okay. The "it's not hard to imagine" list. It's not hard to imagine getting bullied for being you. Be yourself and minds will narrow. Speak your mind and death threats will follow. This is how the book of hate begins. It's not hard to imagine Cass as bullied Holiday in Trance Sings the Blues. It's not hard to imagine another Cass gasping for tomorrow, waking up neither safe nor sound, not feeling dynamite enough to blow up the hurt. It's not hard to imagine some of the teachers at our school saying Kaz deserved it because she was too comfortable in her own skin. It's not hard to imagine another Estelle picked on because she's uncategorizable, a Aquarius who makes up her own words and does not care if the world understands her or not. It's not hard to imagine another Kenzie getting teased for being too geeky, too much into books, too into Oscar Wilde to be a macho man, skinny legs, skinnier arms. It's not hard to imagine outsiders of the world uniting, not giving in or giving up or turning the other cheek. It's not hard to imagine finding strength in the darkest spaces during the saddest hours. It's not hard to imagine. So this book is really not just about romantic love, but a love of sorts, and so love between friends or among friends, love between Kenzie and his role models, which includes Oscar Wilde, and love between a mother and son. So I'm going to end with this poem, and this is dedicated to all the mothers out there. I can find it. So quiet. Oh, where is it? I know, I don't know. Maybe I should sing, then it'll pop up. Oh, God. Oh, here we go. There is the silence that drops from nowhere, and the silence that stabs like a shiny switchblade. There's the silence that comes right at takeoff, and the kind that echoes long after a crash landing. There's the silence that craves for attention and the kind that aches to be left alone. Silence like the red velvet curtain of an old theater full of history, thick and musty. Silence confident as a period, breathless as a comma, endless as ellipsis. There's a silence lovers leave behind, like a suitcase on a platform after the last train. There's a silence lovers arrive with, like a body crammed in a busload of strangers. There's a silence waiting to breathe and a silence crying to be broken. There's a silence rare and breathtaking as the time I caught her in her room, dancing with no music to guide her, just a song playing loudly in her head, leading her to another place, another her. Away from here and away from her. The woman with 1,001 silences who left behind a life in another country, so she did not have to answer to any man or walk 5 steps ahead of him or sleep with dreams bolted down. This woman who made me see silence in words and taught me how to shatter it whenever something was worth hearing. My list of silence, my endless list, my mother. Okay, I'm gonna end with a haiku. Heart, learn from the clouds, promising nothing, even rain. Thank you. Hello, Miss Gina.
Hello.
Good to see you. The last time we
Good
saw
to
each
see
other, we were up a mountain.
I know, we were in the mountains of Baguio.
Baguio.
Oh no, we were buying fish or something.
Yeah, we're in the
Yeah, yeah.
market.
We were in the
Yeah,
market.
we're in the market.
Yeah. It's so great to be here. So great to see all of you. It's so great to finally be talking to Zach about his book. It's a marvelous book, and you've heard I was wondering what you'd be choosing, and yeah, you've heard some wonderful passages from a wonderful book, and so I'd like us to talk first about the pleasures of writing it. I guess you talked about the challenges, so maybe you can also talk about that. But because what I will say about the book's structure and tone, I think it was very difficult to do, and I think you absolutely pulled it off. I think it was really hard. The consistent and unerring tone of love. I just think that was so beautiful to read. Which stayed in the adolescent's voice from beginning to end, and you heard that. Given your complex adult understanding of Wilde, the backdrop of politics, the politics of adolescence, the bullying, the politics of society, militarism, totalitarianism. So it was a phenomenal act, I thought, of ventriloquism from a difficult space to pull off innocence and yearning and longing. So the pleasures of that, the challenges of that, you talked about that, about it's the challenges, it's that romantic voice. And it's just beautiful.
Well, when we first, I think I owe it to my editor, Kate Sullivan, who, when she purchased the manuscript, she said, could we add romance? And I was like, romance? That was like 1984, and what do I know about romance? And then I realized that because I started the novel in Medea Res in the beginning, and then flashback to some kissing and holding hands, and then back to the present. And what she asked me was, do you mind doing it linear, chronological, right? She was very respectful of, I think she read Rowling, so she was respectful of the kind of writer and novelist I am, and that I don't write linear. So I said, well, that's going to be the challenge. But then I realized, if my goal is to make the reader cry, maybe at the end, I think the pain will be more magnified if I do it chronologically. So the challenge, it took me about a year or so to write the romance part. But I also set this in a fictitious island, because she also asked me, why not just set it in Hawaii, in the middle of the Pacific anyway? I said, no, I want to get away from that. I mean, I want to take a break from writing about Hawaii and the Philippines, where I'm from and where I live. And I just want to engage the reader's imagination, like full blast. So I wanted to amp that. And why not create my own fictitious island without the novel being put on the witness stand of authenticity? And I was also, I'm very sensitive about writing about Native Hawaiians. They have their own writers. And so I said, okay, well, I'll just make something up, and but using the colonial history of both Hawaii and the Philippines, where I'm from, right? Both places were colonized. And so I said, but one became a state, the other was given independence. And so what if I clump them in one claustrophobic space, right? Where one is completely totalitarian, military driven, and then the other is free, and where they're more accepting of people like Kaz, who's trans female, and also indigenous from the tribe. And because I also wanted to bring back the whole thing about the island also, like places like the Philippines, where pre-Hispanic culture we did have trans, like the Babaylan in the Philippines, the Mahu in Hawaii, the Fa'afafine in Samoa. So I wanted to pay homage to those kind of history, to that history. And what better way than to put a border between those? But rather than create hostility between the two nations like North and South Korea, I wanted one to have complete control almost of the entire island. So that would be the North. And to put it like love under the age of military rule and also censorship. Because in the North, they're not allowed to read Oscar Wilde. And so I wanted to work along with that. How do you keep loving when you are censored? You know, how do you keep imagining when you are censored?
Yeah.
And so, do we all have to go underground? And it's I think it's very relevant to what's happening now, both here and in the Philippines. You know, with both dictators, having to, and the kind of policing that's also happening here and in the Philippines. So all of that was like, okay, wow, that's a lot, right? But I had to pace it, and I've never written a novel before where I had, with such pacing, such emphasis on pacing, because if you know, like Rolling, it's all frenetic, and Friends, you know, like wow, you know, wham bam, right? Same with Leche, but this time I wanted to go against that because I'm always trying to write against the previous novel or novels. So, and this was, you know, I was writing for a targeted audience, so there was already that parameter, but I wanted to play within that parameter. And the only way I could do that would be like, okay, well, I'm going to use multiple forms and not dictate a single form or a single way of narrating this story of this young boy experiencing love for the first time.
Yeah, and so there are many things that come up that I don't have a pen, so but there are many things that came up with that, with those comments of yours. One of them obviously is that move that you made into YA. I mean, I teach. I mean, I teach. I'm a school teacher, and I teach Rolling the R's to the huge, you know, what do you call this, scandal and shock of the parents. So moving into YA, and you talked about, so in one sense, the YA is like an obstruction for you that allowed the creation of this differently paced voice and sense of time. And it also, but it's interesting that you mentioned the kind of, the issues of colonialism, the issues of, and it's like I mean, critics would call your texts post-colonial novels. And so that link between YA and the post-colonial, have you thought about that?
No, what I was thinking of was with Rolling, I wanted to join those writers that I looked up to, and one of them is in the room, as we both know. She wrote Dog Eaters. I'm not going to say who she is. But I wanted to join those writers who are interested in broadening or challenging the definition, the conventional way of storytelling, and reintroducing other forms of the way we read and think the novel. So that was okay, if I can do that with Rolling, maybe I can do that with the young adults, where from very early on they can start questioning, like, you know, like, what the hell is this? I love that what the hell is this reaction. Even if it's negative, I think it's like, boom, right? Like, to question what is the novel, right? So, and so that was my intent as to why I structured it that way, you know. But then I also realized, like, while writing this, that I have some control where I don't have to say the F word.
Oh, that's another obstruction, you know, because of another way, another challenge.
Yeah. And rephrasing it, and you know, I think it's a very quiet novel, don't you think? I don't know, quiet.
I wouldn't say
not loud, like amplified.
Oh yeah. Different. The tonalities between this and, let's say, Rolling are very, very different. But I don't know if quiet would be the way, because there's that part where he has that anguish over Oscar Wilde.
Oh yeah, shit.
And you know, so there's all of those interesting things.
Yeah. Where he goes crazy, like, how dare you do this?
And it's interesting that's where the anguish goes with Oscar Wilde. You know, with the story of Oscar Wilde, with this kind of interesting, I guess maybe compartmentalizing or moving into thinking about himself through the story of another.
Well, here's the deal, right? Like, when I was reading the biography of Wilde, and these 4 teens that just committed suicide, over a century apart from each other, they were like talking to each other. And so I said, shit, this is the narrative structure of my novel. how they're overlapping and interweaving. And so you remember that scene where, Rand disappears and Kenzie is so depressed, and his world is crumbling.
Spoiler alert.
No, it's not. It's not. It's not. It's not spoiler. It's in the flap.
I never read the flaps.
So anyway, but I think that that it's not a spoiler alert in the sense that it's chronicling. I mean, we all know how first love ends. So we're in denial if we don't know how, right? So, but I really wanted to chronicle first love to first heartbreak to recovery. I mean, that's the formula right there, right? And I followed that. But I also wanted the interweaving of the two. So when he was depressed and he was reading Oscar's prison writings, and he was in prison himself. Yeah. So the two worlds kind of merging, right? And then sort of like swimming in and out of each other. And I said, that's my structure. And once I got that, I said, I have a book. Yeah. So I think this is one of those cases where the structure spoke to me first before the characters and the plot. And, I didn't know I was going to write about a boy's journey into and out of love.
Yeah. Right. So that the other thing that I was thinking of. So, you're talking about Oscar Wilde. You're talking about the kinds of work you wanted to do when you first did Rolling the R's, and then there's that, and then there's the plot of The Boy, and all of them are, for me, one of the things that ties those things together is risk-taking. I remember when I was first reading this, and I happened to speaking to Kirby, and I said, Kirby, oh my God, the shit! There's so much. I mean, it's so bold. I said, in a YA novel, it's so bold. And Kirby, of course, said, Kirby is our agent, by the way, so we share a beautiful agent. And Kirby said, well, that's where YA is. I mean, so it's a lot of the risk-taking happens in YA. But I'm linking that to the life of Oscar Wilde, where he just did what he needed to do. And that's part of the kind of anguish that The Boy has about Wilde, that he chooses something that's very risk-taking, which is to follow his love, and it does make you very angry what Bosie did to Oscar Wilde, but he followed his love for this betrayer, this traitor, this person who is really beneath Oscar Wilde, really, really, just like, for me, the lowest of the low kind of person, that Oscar, but he took the risk for that heart, that 100,000 beating heart, and then the boy in this other realm, is also doing that, and I just like that. I mean, just could you talk about that? It ties the issues of the homophobia, all of the issues of bullying, art, and
well, like I said, in the North, homosexuality is a crime. And Oscar Wilde is censored. And if you're familiar with Oscar Wilde's play, The Importance of Being Earnest, there is the art of bun-burying, right? Where you are so tired of your world and your life and your identity that you go to another place and you assume an identity. And so I wanted to play with that, with the whole concept of bun-burying. For Oscar, it was all about, posing, right? But I wanted to bring it closer to home, to the home of my novel, which is for kids who can't be themselves, for teens who can't be themselves in a military run or in a very claustrophobic atmosphere. But they're privileged, right? They have to cross the border to Bunbury, but as themselves, right? So, and for Kenzie, Bunbury, he realizes, you have to be on a budget. I mean, you can't Bunbury if you're on a budget, right? So I wanted to play with that whole concept of Bunburying, and also that, and like, I don't know. It's really complicated to it becomes more complex. So, because I didn't want Rand to be just another asshole. Like, okay, he appears in his life and he disappears, because we don't really know what's going on, what's happening in that country, right? That place called North Crystal. We do, but we know enough that perhaps he's not going to have a happy ending, right? He's not going to be able to be himself, you know? So there are all these negotiations that Kenzie and even Rand had to have to go through, you know, just to be themselves. My God, it is so tiring. Why can't I just be myself, right? Like Oscar Wilde, but he was himself, and look what happened to him, right? So, you know, it's
But there's something you do though with the life of Oscar Wilde through the voice of this boy. So what do you think? What was it that you wanted to do? I mean, I have some ideas, but you go ahead.
Oh, I want to hear your ideas, because I'm sure it's going to be better than mine. Okay, so I'm interested in islanders and how they appropriate the West in this case. So like, and this kid and how his imagination was ripened or fueled by this Irish playwright who lived a century ago, and how that society informs his identity and his world. That's what I'm interested. Like the way in Rolling, I'm interested in how these brown kids could translate Donna Summer and Village People to not only to help them express themselves, but to mold and fashion their identities. So that's what I'm interested in. I guess the word is appropriation. I'm trying to avoid that word, but yeah. And so that's...
No, I would say conquer. They conquer.
Oh, I love it. Yeah. See, I knew it. See, conquer. Yeah. I knew you had something.
Yeah, he conquers the story of Wilde in some way by becoming this. He by keeping his sweetness.
Yes. And the other thing that I brought in was this whole thing about role models and how they help mold the kind of writer that Kenzie is. So in this case, you know, there's this whole thing about the creative process, a chapter where he's trying to write a poem and Oscar is telling him, enjoy the joyride and don't rush the head rush, Kenzie. You know, the Mona Lisa wasn't painted overnight. So it talks about the creative process. But I also want to push it further and like, what do we ask from our role models? You know, because because he realizes that's the spoiler, right? I'm not going to go into that. Yeah. So, yeah.
Do we have questions from the audience?
I'm interested in where you put your book in time, because I thought that when you moved it into this kind of speculative island of North and South Crystal, and it kind of got this dystopian feel. And I know there's a connection between dystopian modes of storytelling and YA fiction, because we all have this youthful self that we like to have tapped. So in many ways, when I was reading this book, I wasn't thinking that this is for young people, but it's for me to activate my young self while I'm reading it and to try to strip away some of that lacquer in order to get there. But I was just interested, writing about something that felt like a dystopia, but that is largely created out of actual life experiences. I mean, how did that come? How did you think of that? Or how did that resonate with your storytelling process?
Okay, so one of the things that I had to do was, aside from inventing this fictitious island that's shared by two nations, I had to also invent apps.
Oh, yeah.
I should copyright those apps actually. You know, so like zaps and talking bubbles, but dystopic as it is, I think it departs from the usual dystopic novel because I ground it in colonialism. I ground it in class, and also it's interesting because, you know, this is like my third reading, and I've spoken to some of the readers, and they it's interesting what they make of North and South Crystal. Like one said, oh, it's Haiti and Dominican Republic. Then another said, oh, that's like North and South Korea. Then another said, this really brilliant reviewer said, oh, it's like Singapore, Singapore and Malaysia. So, and what I had in mind, the model that I had in mind was closer to home, Hawaii being the North and the Philippines being the South, but not sticking to them as the model, right? So I think it's rooting that dystopic to something that is easy, that is recognizable, for those who have been colonized, right? Quiet. Yes. And you notice there's no year. When Kenzie writes his journals, he doesn't put the year. Yeah.
Because it is also that time of first love, I guess.
Right. I wanted to have that, you can't pin it down. Like it's recognizable, but you can't pin it down. Yes.
Hello. That was a wonderful reading. Thank you.
Thank you.
A question I have is, this was new for you. I'm curious to know if you personally know any young adults, or any young adult writers, and whether or not they were a part of your process.
I had to read a lot of young adult novels, but I also went back to my youth and reread them, like Judy Blume and Scott O'Dell, those guys, right? But my editor gave me a bunch of reading lists, like Andrew Smith and A.S. King, but I also knew Benjamin Aliri Saints, and so I read them. I have nephews and nieces who are Kenzie's age, and believe me, I told them, we're gonna go out and I'm gonna interview you. And so I asked them, and I got to know them more. I think it brought me closer to my nephews and nieces, and one of them is my reader, and so she would say, I want to know how they met. Like, really? You have to know that? Because yeah, so I had to go back and edit, and so I'm working on a young adult novel now. I don't know why, but anyway, I said, Bella, you're gonna read this, and she's like, okay. But it's funny too, because she informed me if I was going the right path. In that, like, I don't want to read it anymore, she said. And goes, why? Because I know what's going to happen. And I said, oh, I'm on the right track. You better read it. Yeah. I don't think you can go into the world of YA without being familiar with.
You have to read their stuff.
Yeah, especially, yeah. And also talking to young adults. And I was just at Punahou Academy last week, where I spent 3 days with 9th to 12th graders. And it was an amazing experience. But it was also very exhausting. I from 8 a.m. to like 3 a.m. constantly talking with a lunch break between. But I learned so much. And I have a different understanding of them, a deeper and more complex understanding of them now. I have more respect for them, I think. Yeah. And what they're going through.
In many ways, they're very pure. I teach them every day. So
Oh.
but they're very pure readers. I mean, the students, the younger readers. So, are there other questions?
Yeah.
Zach, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to hear you read again.
Oh, thank you.
So I think my question is about how the characters in this book relate to the characters in Rolling. Because I'm thinking about how in Rolling, those characters, they're so young, You realize when you enter the text that these are really young kids, and yet they're so knowing, right? And so, the first scene is one of the characters having sex with the janitor in the school, right? And so there's no childhood innocence in that text, right? And so now when you're writing this kind of, within this kind of YA genre, how do you deal with, you know, the sexuality that is so upfront in Rolling, and, you know, giving that the fullness that you have in the past, but doing it in this other genre?
At least the parents won't get mad, you know.
And the deans too. That was the part of the challenge, Gayatri. I think it was writing against Rolling. I didn't want to repeat Rolling, but and in Rolling, these kids were forced to grow up. They lived in an atmosphere of violence, right, in Rolling. I think it was similar here, but there's a little tenderness. Like, you actually have a mother who guides Kenzie. I mean, Kenzie also writes haikus, and he got into the habit of writing haikus because his mother read a lot of, being Japanese, read a lot of Japanese literature, and also got him into the habit of making lists. So, but in Rolling, with the exception of Exotica, who's a trans figure, right, who becomes their on-again, off-again Hanaid mother, they have no one to guide them. So they have to force, it's a force, and like, I'm forced to grow up. So, you know, there are prom situations in this novel, but those kids don't have time for proms. I mean, they bypass adolescence, you know, and I think that, you know, that with Rolling, I'm exploring those kids more. Actually, I'm writing a sequel to Rolling, so, and it takes place in the 80s with Exotica as their Hanaid or adopted mother, and it's interesting with this, even with this sequel that I'm working on now, it's very controlled, and I was like, what's happening to me, you know? And then somebody said, well, you got older.
What's wrong with that?
No, it's fine, fab. And I'm glad, because I like I said, well, that means that I'm going the right direction, that it's a different novel, you know. I think I stop writing if I can recognize that I'm repeating my structure and my, you know, my themes, or my voice, or the plot, or yeah.
I don't know if I can articulate my question, but my mind is roiling, and I'm terrified of YA novels. But I want you to sort of keep talking about it, because it's so fascinating to me, this world, and I keep murmuring over here like, why can't he use fuck? I mean, that's how kids talk.
I think
He decided.
you
decided with this book.
I decided with this book.
It was a decision.
But
We were sitting
but
here
the
going,
YA has, it's dark, it's
yes,
twisted.
I know, the little bit I've
you know.
read, you know. So I'm super fascinated by this conversation, by the way. And so I guess my question sort of leading into, so is this genre business kind of dictated, hello, Kirby, where are you? Because, where are you? Are you still here?
there.
Oh, there you are. No, I'm super interested in this. So it's also addressed to you, because this is new to me. I mean, I know this has been going on for a while.
She's
but,
Jessica Hagedorn, the other Oscar Wilde guru figure.
I'm his mom. Yeah. No. So yeah. How I do say it's connected to your question about Rolling. To me, could be read by a 12-year-old who's precocious enough to go in there. So what's the difference here? Because you're addressing a particular market, but is it marketed remarkably different than Rolling might have been if that was the manuscript he submitted? You know what I mean? I'm even thinking of things way back in my youth, which, you know, precedes yours.
As if there's like a border.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
Yeah,
the
yeah,
North and the
yeah.
South. and
Okay, so this is what I did.
Catcher in the Rye. I mean, come on.
I wrote the manuscript and I gave it to Kirby.
No. Yeah, and he said it was a YA.
I don't know what you answered that question, Kirby.
I would love for talk about that market. Market. I hate reader. Those readers. They're just fancy words for please.
Somebody once described it as, and I was just talking to Justine about this actually, which was, what's the difference between having a young central character and having having it be an adult novel and having that same character but having it be YA or a children's book. And she described it as a lot of times it's the lens by which you examine what they're going through.
Okay.
So with the young adult or the middle grade protagonist, you have a much more, there's a less distance in kind of perspective that colors the way that they're interpreting their events. And as a result, you feel you as a reader can recognize what they're not seeing, right? You can recognize their angst and you can feel that kind of urgency that comes from being young. But a lot of times with the adult version of that, the lens is coming from, you have that adult perspective a bit, and it changes how how that character is actually interpreting those events, and also the way the writer is presenting them. And I've found that to be generally true when I'm reading, different manuscripts. But sometimes, you just kind of know it when you see it. And when Zach handed in that, and I agree with you, Jessica, that Rolling the R's could absolutely be YA. It's edgy, it's provocative, and it could work. It could work now. But this was just very clearly it spoke to I think a younger reader, and that's where I felt the largest kind of effect was going to be.
And what is the age range of this so-called market?
There's young adult, there's middle grade,
It's very segmented. Yeah. So middle grade is 8 to 12, I believe, and then 13 to 19, 18.
And that would be
right.
His okay.
Right. But what we know is that a lot of young adult readers are adults.
Yes, that's most.
Well,
yeah.
I would imagine so, because I think the last thing I'd like to just sort of say about it is, I think a great book with a young central character would be written with that lens you're talking about, because if you got to present them without that adult hovering, telling you how to look at this kid. For me, when it's successful, it's really like this kid is talking to you. Yeah. So, I just don't, I'm just making trouble. And I'm going to read your book, Zach. Oh, I have a question for you. Do you mind? Can I hog it? Why do you always start this conversation with romance? I didn't know what did you say? Why do you resist romance?
Well, it was in 1984.
Oh, come on. Your poetry is so romantic and what is this thing
maybe,
you're going
maybe I'm
on
in
about?
denial. I don't know.
You are in denial.
Totally
That's
in denial.
all I have to say.
And but when Kate, my first editor, because my other editor is also here, is Alex. Where's Alex? Raise your hand, Alex.
Oh, Alex.
That's my other editor.
I have a YA manuscript for you.
No, I think that it's, for me, I don't want to say easy, but that's the only word that's coming out right now. Or I gravitate to, it's easier for me to write about the pain and the loss.
But that's romance. Romanticism.
No, but I think the romantic that Kate, my first editor, was talking about was the, the holding hands, the initial romance.
You do that?
Trust me, that kissing scene, I had to dig into the pit of my memory.
Well, that's good. Well, hooray.
Yeah.
Congratulations,
Oh.
Zach. Really.
Hi, Zach.
Hi.
Hi, Gina. But hi, Jessica. So I was like, oh my god. No, so I think, but I actually I want to echo everyone because you can kind of keep saying that what I'm hearing, or that I'm going a different direction. But if you're an avid reader of your work, as I am, it's the voice is the same actually. Like there's something about the kind of ways that you're often coming from characters who assume a particular type of trajectory and then get lost in the process, right? So they assume they're going to return to the Philippines in Lecce and it's going to look a certain way in Manila, and then it's completely disoriented by it. But that disorientation is romantic in a sense that it's about a particular type of unwieldiness or even waywardness that makes them young again. And I think like that actually, so regardless of the age of the character, so I guess that's my question. Is there an attraction to a kind of, like, there's always an attraction to a cliff that you have to jump off of that seems to then become the impetus for all of these characters to have a voice. It seems like even in Rolling, right? So there's violence, but there's always the fun of even thinking about like the violence around it. But then they don't really know what's happening. But then they kind of, even in the first piece you read, right? It's like a mistranslation, but it's often at the edge of something else, right? And so I'm kind of, I guess that's my question, right? That they might be different in age, but I think to a reader, the voice actually is coming from a source, right?
Yes and no. I think that the main challenge for me, now I have to be very specific, I think it's language. That it's about tracking down that right language to narrate the story. And I think that is why it took me 12 years to write Lecce, because I couldn't pin down that language, the narrators, not just the voice, but the language to tell this story, right? And it's like, what language is English? No, it's a different kind of English. And even with this one, it's language. And I think that this is where maybe my background as a poet, because I'm obsessed with like how this English is going to be presented, and whether it's going to be presented in 17 syllables or in the form of a list. It's that the way, the turn of phrase. And I also feel that I think that a lot of my experimentation, if you want to call it that, is really like, or you say risk-taking, it's in the language. It's what I try to do with the English language. And aside from the structure, whatever, because I do agree. I mean, the narrative structure, the style and the form of this novel echoes Rolling. And so the interesting thing there is Rolling's my first novel, and this is my first young adult novel. And I told myself, I'm going to go all out and not care. If I'm going to have a fail, it's going to be spectacular. And that was my attitude with Rolling. With Lecce, it was very different. It was more of like the second book syndrome, but it was really nailing down that language. And once I got that language, it was like, boom, I got my narrator. I got that whatever the telescope that, that's going to speak through to the reader, So yes, it is the language.
I get what you mean by that. I mean, when the difference between Rolling, for instance, and this one, and I was trying to talk about the YA, not as really as an artistic construction that you have in order to create this piece, to think about that reader from the not from I really didn't see it as the reason why I thought the book. I love this book. I think that as a work of art and what it was what I thought you were attempting to do, you were doing something within using all of the tools that Zach has in his so-called adult work, which my little 16-year-olds, read. But using all of those tools, but giving himself those restrictions, those interesting limitations. And I thought that was really phenomenal about the novel, because it was, I felt I could see you working through how to speak this particular voice to that particular audience. And it's an interesting artistic experiment. It's like an Olipo thing, but we put it in a market category. And so we could also move out of the market category and say, this is an artist's leap, YA as an artist lead?
Yeah, thank you. And I was also working. Well, there's this thing called narrative collage, right? And I was working within the limitations of this island boy, and the tools that he has, which is language and school essays and all of that, right? And I came across this world called bricolage or bricolage. I think this is more of that, like it's a narrative bricolage where it's like using the tools that the limited tools that you have to tell this story. And it fits perfectly, I think, for this book because, he lives on an island in the middle of nowhere, and above them is this military nation that's about to invade them, but by supporting them or helping them economically, right? So, oof. Oh my God. Yeah, no.
No, it is. It's
Heavy.
The thing about the issue of the market, I think, is so interesting. But I think, I visited Zach in Baguio, and what's interesting, actually, this is a question that I did want to ask. Except, he's created a life in order to write. He has moved out of the worlds where, you've moved out of Manila, which is where the writers are, seemingly, and he's created a life outside of Camp John Hay. By the way, talk about border. That's Camp John Hay was where the Americans had set up their recreation park.
That's right. No,
so you are in the border, in the forest there, and then here's Camp John Hay, and just the crafting of a life. So in order to do the work that he wants to do, that these are all choices that you've absolutely decided to make. So as an artist, to do the YA novel is absolutely an artist's choice. As you can see with the life that you lead. I mean, just completely making the choices that a lot of Filipino writers wouldn't do because, the concept of status, being with the people, knowing the people. Instead, Zach is always moving away from status, So I wanted to, if you could, would you want to talk about that? I don't know, because it's a personal thing about these life choices.
Well, I had it living within Manila. I just totally had it. I couldn't. It was unbearable. The infrastructure was just going downhill, and I used to love to take the train that takes me from north to south of Manila, and it got to the point where like, oh my God, I get claustrophobic really fast, and that line to even enter the train station that goes around for, I don't know, a quarter of a mile. I just couldn't do it anymore. And my relationship with Manila was all put in Lecce, and I needed to move on, but I didn't know I was going to have to physically move out of Manila. And when I went to Baguio to adapt, to do a first draft adaptation of Lois Anne's Blues Hanging, and the fact that I was able to produce a first draft in like 5 days, I said, this is where I'm going to live. And I moved there like 3 years ago. And what Gina is talking about is I live right at the foot or right outside of a former U.S. military base. So, and maybe
where Ran used to live.
Probably, yeah. And I love it. I need that silence, I think, and that isolation. I can thank the McDowell Colony for training me that. But I need that isolation especially in the first draft of the novel, because I need complete autonomy also and control. So, and that's when I go crazy, so I want to go crazy on my own in that small house, and explore. I can't be around noise or Manila is magical, but it's a magical that I can have access to when I want to. But for this novel, it had to be very, the environment had to be compatible with the text.
Are you going to move for the next one?
No, I'm staying put. I'm tired. Well, yeah, because I'm working the sequel to Rolling, and I go back and forth between Honolulu and I can't write in Honolulu now because it's just like I love it. I mean, that's my break from. That's where I go bunburying. That's my break from my writer life, and that's that's where I get my materials, and then I process them in a very quiet place in Baguio. Yeah. Yeah, it's fine. No.
We have time for one more question. If anyone has a question.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Gina and to Zach, for being here.